I almost didn't come to Dad's annual family barbecue this year. After what happened last time, I wanted to stay home with Jonathan and watch movies instead. But my sister Lisa had called 3 times, begging me to show up. "Sarah, please. Everyone wants to see you and Jonathan," she'd said. "Everyone except Dad," I muttered. The truth was burning inside me like hot coals. Dad had never accepted Jonathan as his real grandson. It didn't matter that I'd raised him since he was 8 days old. It didn't matter that I'd been the one to rock him through fevers and nightmares, or that I was the one who cheered loudest at his baseball games. In Dad's eyes, blood was all that counted. Now we stood in Dad's perfectly trimmed backyard. The smell of burgers filled the air. Kids ran around screaming with joy. It should have felt like home. Instead, my stomach was in knots. "Mom, can I go play with Zach and Emma?" Jonathan asked, his brown eyes shining with hope. "Of course, honey," I said, forcing a smile. "Have fun." I watched my 12-year-old son run off toward his cousins. His brown hair caught the sunlight as he moved. My heart swelled with love and pride. From the moment I'd held him in the adoption agency, he'd been mine in every way that mattered. "He's growing like a weed," Lisa said, appearing next to me with a glass of lemonade. "I know. He's almost as tall as me now," I said, taking the drink gratefully. Lisa squeezed my arm. "Dad's by the grill. You should say hello." I took a deep breath. "Sure." Walking across the lawn felt like crossing a battlefield. Dad stood tall, despite his 58 years, his grey hair neatly combed, manning the grill like it was his personal kingdom. He glanced up as I approached, his blue eyes meeting mine for just a second. "Hi, Dad," I said. "Sarah," he replied with a nod. "Glad you could make it." His words were polite, but there was no warmth behind them. No hug, no smile, just the same distance that had grown between us since I'd adopted Jonathan as a divorced single mom. "Need any help?" I offered. "I've got it under control," he said, flipping a burger. "Your Uncle Bob brought his famous potato salad. It's on the table." That was it. Our entire conversation. I walked away feeling like a stranger in my childhood home. For the next hour, I chatted with aunts, uncles, and cousins, always keeping one eye on Jonathan. He was having a blast with his cousins, and for that, I was grateful. Maybe coming had been the right decision after all. Until I noticed Dad watching Jonathan, there was something in his gaze that made my heart drop. It was the same look he'd given when I first told him I was adopting, like he was looking at something that didn't quite belong. "Everything okay?" Lisa asked, noticing my expression. Dad's staring at Jonathan again. I whispered. Lisa sighed. "He'll come around someday." "It's been 12 years, I reminded her. Before she could respond, Jonathan came racing across the lawn toward us. His face lit up with excitement. In his hand, he clutched his science fair medal. My stomach tightened. I knew what was coming. "Mom, Aunt Lisa, is Grandpa still by the grill? I want to show him my medal," Jonathan said, breathless from running. I wanted to protect him, to make up an excuse, to save him from the rejection I felt certain was coming. But Lisa jumped in first. "He sure is, buddy. I bet he'd love to see it," she said. Jonathan beamed and turned toward the grill, where Dad was serving up burgers to a small crowd of relatives. I followed a few steps behind, my heart pounding. "Grandpa! Grandpa!" Jonathan called out. "Look what I got at school. First place in the science fair." Dad turned, spatula in hand. He looked at Jonathan, then at the medal dangling from my son's fingers. The small group around the grill grew quiet. "It's about water purification," Jonathan explained, holding up the medal proudly. "I made a filter system that works just like the ones they use in developing countries." There was a terrible pause. I could see my father's face change, his eyes narrowing slightly. Then he did the thing I'd been dreading for years. He snorted and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "He's not even my real grandson anyway." A few awkward chuckles rose from the group. Jonathan stood frozen, medal still raised in the air. His smile faded slowly, like a light being dimmed. I felt my heart shatter into a million pieces. "Dad," Lisa gasped. But my father just shrugged and turned back to the grill. I wanted to scream, to grab Jonathan and run, to tell my father exactly what I thought of him and his narrow view of family. 12 years of holding back, boiled inside me like a volcano ready to erupt. Then something unexpected happened. Jonathan straightened his shoulders. His chin lifted. Instead of tears, his eyes held determination. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Actually, Grandpa," he said in a clear, steady voice that made everyone turn to look at him, "I brought something for you today." My breath caught in my throat. The envelope. I'd almost forgotten about it. I'd written that letter months ago, pouring my heart onto paper, after hearing Jonathan ask Lisa why his grandfather always seemed so cold toward him. But I'd never found the courage to give it to Dad. Jonathan must have found it in my desk drawer. Dad turned back around, his eyebrows raised in surprise at Jonathan's calm response. "What's that supposed to be?" he asked. Jonathan looked at me across the lawn, a silent question in his eyes. Should he go through with this? I gave him a small nod, amazed at my son's courage. My son. My beautiful, brave boy, who had every right to be part of this family. The entire backyard had fallen silent now. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all watching as my 12-year-old walked calmly across the grass toward the man who had just publicly rejected him. "I think this might help you understand something important," Jonathan said, holding out the envelope. Dad took it with a confused look. "What is this?" "It's a letter from Mom," Jonathan explained. "Would you please read it out loud, Grandpa? I think everyone should hear what Mom wrote." I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me. My cheeks burned. This wasn't how I'd imagined this happening. But maybe it was better this way. Maybe the truth needed witnesses. "Read it, Dad," Lisa urged, stepping forward to stand beside Jonathan. Dad looked uncomfortable, but with everyone watching, he reluctantly opened the envelope. He pulled out the pages I'd filled with my handwriting months ago, on a night when my heart had been too full of hurt to sleep. "Dear Dad," he began reading, his voice stiff and formal. "I'm writing this letter because there are things I need to say that get stuck in my throat whenever I try to say them in person." As he read, memories washed over me. I remembered the night Jonathan came into my life, tiny and perfect, wrapped in a blue hospital blanket. I remembered the way his little hand had wrapped around my finger, as if to say, "I choose you to be my mom." When I held Jonathan for the first time, Dad continued reading, I knew he was my son, not because of blood or DNA, but because of love. The kind of love that keeps you up all night watching for fever to break. The kind of love that makes you cheer until you're hoarse at T-ball games. The kind of love that would make you step in front of a moving train without hesitation. Dad's voice wavered slightly. I noticed his hands trembling just a bit as he turned to the second page. "I know adoption wasn't the path to motherhood you expected for me," he read, "but it's the path that brought me the greatest joy of my life. When you deny Jonathan as your grandson, you deny not only his place in our family, but my journey as a mother." Tears welled in my eyes. I felt Lisa's hand slip into mine, squeezing gently. Around us, relatives stood in shocked silence. Dad cleared his throat before continuing. "Blood doesn't make a family. Love, choice, and commitment do. Jonathan chose to call you Grandpa, despite your coldness. The question is, will you choose to be worthy of that title?" The letter ended there. Dad slowly lowered the pages, his face impossible to read. His eyes moved from the letter to Jonathan, who still stood before him, with remarkable poise, for a 12-year-old. "I may not have your blood, Grandpa," Jonathan said into the silence, "but I have Mom's heart, and that makes me a part of this family." Pride rushed through me like a tidal wave. When had my little boy become so wise, so brave? I wanted to run to him, to wrap him in my arms, but I knew this was his moment. He needed to stand on his own. Dad stared at Jonathan for what felt like forever. The backyard was so quiet, I could hear birds chirping in the trees. Then Lisa stepped forward, placing her hand on Jonathan's shoulder. "He's more like Sarah than any of us, Dad," she said softly. "And he's been waiting for you to see him, really see him, for years." One by one, other family members moved closer. "Jonathan helped me set up my new phone last Christmas," Aunt Martha said. Spent a whole hour showing me how to use it. He sent me a handmade card when my dog died, Cousin Ellie added. Most thoughtful kid I know. He's got your stubborn chin, Mike, Uncle Bob pointed out with a gentle smile. Family isn't just blood. I watched as my father's rigid expression began to crumble around the edges. He looked down at the letter again, then carefully folded it and put it back in the envelope. His hands were definitely shaking now. I didn't know, he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. I never thought about it that way. The question is, Dad, Lisa said gently, what will you do now that you do know? Dad looked lost, smaller, somehow, than the imposing figure who had dominated my childhood. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes instead of judgment. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the yard. Most of the food had been eaten. Kids were slowing down, tired from playing. In the distance, Jonathan was helping Aunt Martha collect paper plates, always the helpful one. I need to think, Dad mumbled, turning away from us all. He walked into the house, the screen door slamming behind him. Lisa came to stand beside me. You okay? She asked. I don't know, I admitted. I never meant for him to find that letter. Maybe it's exactly what needed to happen, she said. We helped clean up the yard as the party wound down. Most relatives left with hugs that felt warmer than usual and whispered words of support. You've done an amazing job with that boy, Aunt Martha told me. Don't let anyone tell you different. Jonathan stayed busy, avoiding my eyes. I wasn't sure if he was embarrassed or worried about my reaction to him taking the letter. As the last car pulled away, leaving just me, Jonathan, Lisa, and Dad still inside the house, I finally approached my son. Hey, I said softly. Are you mad? He asked, looking up with worried eyes. About the letter? I shook my head. No, honey. I'm proud of you. That took incredible courage. He shrugged, trying to look casual even though I could see the emotion in his eyes. I just wanted him to understand. I'm tired of feeling like I don't belong. My heart broke all over again. You belong, Jonathan. You've always belonged. Not to him, he said quietly. Before I could respond, the screen door creaked open. Dad stepped out onto the porch, his face shadowed in the dim evening light. He looked older somehow, wearier. Jonathan, he called. Could I talk to you for a minute? Jonathan looked at me, uncertainty flashing across his face. It's up to you, I told him. We can go home right now if you want. He squared his shoulders. No, I want to hear what he has to say. I watched my brave boy walk across the lawn toward my father. Part of me wanted to go with him, to shield him from any more hurt, but another part knew this was something they needed to do together. Dad gestured to the porch swing, and they both sat down. From where I stood, I could just make out their words. I owe you an apology, Dad said, his voice carrying in the quiet evening air. What I said today, what I've been saying and thinking for years, it was wrong. Jonathan didn't respond right away. He just swung his legs slightly, making the swing creak. Why don't you think I'm your real grandson? He finally asked. Dad sighed heavily. It's not about you, son. It's about me. I grew up thinking family was only about blood. My father taught me that, and his father before him. That's silly, Jonathan said with a simple clarity of youth. My friend Max was adopted from China, and his parents are white, but they're still his real parents. A small chuckle escaped Dad. You're right, it is silly, and I was wrong. So, am I your real grandson now? Jonathan asked. There was a pause, and I held my breath. You always were, Dad said, his voice cracking. I was just too stubborn to see it. Then something happened that made tears spring to my eyes. Dad reached out and put his arm around Jonathan's shoulders, the first real gesture of affection I'd ever seen between them. I was wrong, Dad continued, and I've missed out on knowing an extraordinary grandson. Jonathan leaned into the half-hug. We still have time, Grandpa. That's why Mom wrote the letter, because she believes people can change. Your mum's a smart woman, Dad said. Smarter than her old man, that's for sure. They sat in silence for a moment, the porch swing creaking gently. You know, Dad finally said, I've got an old fishing rod in the garage that belonged to my father. I've been saving it, thinking someday. Well, anyway, would you like to try it out sometime? There's a good spot at Miller's Pond. I've never been fishing, Jonathan admitted. Never been fishing? Dad sounded genuinely shocked. Well, we need to fix that. How about next Saturday? Really? The hope in Jonathan's voice made my throat tight. Really? Dad confirmed. If your mum says it's okay. They both looked over at me then, and I quickly wiped away my tears. Mum, can I go fishing with Grandpa next weekend? Jonathan called out. I walked toward them, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. Of course you can. Dad stood up as I approached, awkwardness returning to his posture. But something was different now. He couldn't quite meet my eyes, but it wasn't from stubbornness this time. It was from shame. Sarah, he began. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Dad, I told him. What matters is what you do from here. He nodded, seeming to understand. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the envelope containing my letter. Thank you for this, he said quietly. I needed to hear it. The three of us stood there in the fading light, an imperfect family taking its first steps toward healing. Lisa came out of the house and joined us on the porch, completing our small circle. Does this mean we can come to the barbecue next year without drama? She joked, breaking the tension. Dad actually smiled. I'll even make my special sauce for Jonathan's burger. With extra pickles? Jonathan asked hopefully. With as many pickles as you want, grandson, Dad replied, the word grandson sounding different now, warmer, truer. As we said our goodbyes and headed to the car, I felt lighter than I had in years. The letter I'd written in anger and heartache had somehow become a bridge instead of a torch. In the car, Jonathan was unusually quiet, staring out the window at the darkening sky. You okay, buddy? I asked. Yeah, he said. Then, after a pause, do you think he really meant it? About me being his real grandson? I reached over and took his hand. I think today was the first time he's been honest. With us, and with himself. And yes, I believe him. Jonathan nodded, seeming satisfied. Mom? Yes, honey? I'm sorry I took your letter without asking, he said. I squeezed his hand. Some things happen exactly when they're supposed to happen. I'm proud of you for being braver than I was. We make a good team, he said with a yawn. The best team, I agreed. As we drove home under a sky full of stars, I thought about family, how it can hurt you deeper than anything else, but also how it can heal in ways nothing else can. Dad still had a long way to go to make up for 12 years of keeping Jonathan at arm's length. One afternoon couldn't erase all that hurt. But it was a start. And sometimes, a start is the hardest part of any journey. Hey, Mom! Jonathan's sleepy voice came from beside me. Yes? I think I'm going to like fishing. I smiled in the darkness. I think you will too. As I drove, I noticed the full moon rising, casting silver light over the familiar roads leading home. Home to our little house that might not be fancy, but was filled with more love than any mansion. Home to the life I'd chosen, with the son who had chosen me right back. A family of our own making, real in every way that mattered.